Begin the current Daf, Mesech Yevamos Daf Ayin Beis, begin 13 lines down at the top of the Yomit. The Gemara continues the discussion of the previous Daf, which we were talking about the opening words of the title of the Perek HaOral, which talks about an oral, someone who's uncircumcised regarding his prohibition of eating truma. We continue a related discussion regarding the Mashuch, which is a form of being uncircumcised. The shares corresponds to the Kalzach and Cheskel today's Daf. Something we discussed in today's Daf, like we just said, in the previous Daf we discussed ha'oral, someone who's uncircumcised yechad b'truma. Today we discussed regarding someone who's mashuch, which Rashi explains is someone who's mahol, shenimshach ar but that his foreskin was pulled over, and now the chisas atar is covering over the atara, that now he appears to be like he's oral. Mila shlev is mamna regarding what's the halacha if, let's say, the mila is not on the 8th day. Does it have to be during the daytime, or could it even be at the nighttime? And then the Gemara continues regarding an oral is allowed to perform haza'as mechatas, to spray the purifying paraduma waters, which the Gemara gets into the discussion regarding the mechatas, which are the purifying waters. Chatas could also mean to spray, which is also, these are the waters that are sprayed on a person, which they would take a paraduma and sacrifice it, and then they would burn it. That's part of the avoid, and afterwards they would gather the ashes. That's a sifa safara. That's another part of the avoid. And then there's mixing with the water. That's called kiddush. And then there would be another part of the avoid, which actually sprayed the water, the ash water, on the person that had a tumas mess. So we begin the current Daf, 13 lines down at the top of the Yom Daf Ayin Beis. Like we said in the Gemara in the previous Daf, when we taught that ha'oral lo yechel b'truma. Now a related discussion, Amrav Hundi says Devat Torah, from biblical law, mashuch, someone who is drawn, meaning he had circumcised the foreskin, but now it was pulled over and it's now covering over the corona. So from biblical law, he's really considered an oral. He can eat truma. But from rabbinical law, they decreed on such a person. He looks like he's uncircumcised because you could pull the skin over like as if it's the original foreskin covering over the gland, and therefore rabbinically you're not allowed to eat truma. Now, Meisver, the Gemara asks from the following brisa. Brisa says, Mashuch, if someone is drawn, Tzarech Sheyamol, we see that he has to go ahead and do the bris milah. So the Gemara assumes what it means to say is that because it means to say you're considered an oral. And Rav Huna had said, biblical law, you're not considered oral. So the Gemara, no, Midrabanan. When the brisa says that the Mashuch has to do bris milah is rabbinic, which is what Rav Huna held. So the Gemara says, yeah, the karila, my karila. When the one who was asking the question, what was he asking? Hatzarch katani. To the contrary, the word tzarech of the brisa, mashuch tzarech sheyamol, that sounds rabbinic because it was biblical. It should have said mashuch hariza oral. If someone is mashuch, he's an oral and therefore cannot eat biblically. What were you asking to say? As if you had a question on Rav Huna to say, aha, you see that tzarech sheyamol, that he's an oral. They should have said that from saying the word tzarech sounds rabbinic. So the Gemara says, you're right, but katani b'seifa. The one who asked the question, his mistake, what misled him was the seifa of this brisa. Because the brisa had said, he says, loyal, no. The brisa says, the Tanakhama said, tzarech sheyamol. The Rebbe says, no, don't do bris milah if you did your meishach or lasai. Why? Because it's dangerous, because you're not really an oral, you don't really have the foreskin, and if you're going to be cutting off, you might become a kurei shavcha, might go ahead and injure the male organ. Therefore, Rebbe says, don't do the bris milah. Which they said the hektim. What do you mean? Ben Kuziva. In history, there was a time of Ben Kuziva, which is Bar Kachva, where the non-Jews forcibly made the Jews pull over their skin to make it look like as if they're uncircumcised in the city of Beitar. Then Ben Kuziva overpowered them, and they fought them and they conquered the enemy, and he ruled over the Jewish people for 2.5 years, and in those 2.5 years, many Jews went and did a circumcision for their skin that was pulled over. By lead the banim or banis and had sons and daughters, like it says the pasuk in Bereshis, himo yimo, that you shall surely circumcise. But what's the redundant himo yamo? We have chech techiach, we have all these psukim when it says a second time. Even 100 times you do the bris milah. So you see that, yeah, even if you had the milah and it was nimshach Allah, so you do it again. So to Omer it says afterwards, in the pasuk after that, it says that an oral zachar that will not circumcise the foreskin of his flesh, So because it's brisi hefar. My covenant is nullified. What's that? L'Rabbi says a mashach that comes to include the bris of the one who is Moshe or Lasei. Says why do you, first we're asking why do you have to bring another pasuk? Because Rechitim are going to say no hi himel yimel the pasuk of himel yamol. That's not coming to kula fil mei pa'amim to say that even when nimshach or Lasei you should do bris milah. That's l'Rabbi tzitzama akvenes milah, which we said in the previous stuff. That's coming to say that you got to do it again because there are certain strips that you failed to cut off. And therefore, that's what himo yomel, but that's not saying if you had a regular bris milah to do it again with nimshach or lasei. But the second pasuk is brisi helfer that's extra to tell the rabbis to the mashach to include the one who is moshe or lasei. That's the brisa. That's what. So that was the sefer. So explains the Gemara. Who the one who had asked on Rav Huna from the Reisha, Saber he thought midikonosav lahashas from the fact that the Rabbanan bring the source for their teaching that a Moshe or Lasei needs to do bris milah, they bring a kra pasuk, himo yomol, as brisi hafer. So sounds like they're raisi, that it's biblical, and therefore that's why they were asking Rav Huna. You see, the Tanakama holds mashach tzarch sheyamol, that you see it's a biblical halacha. Not like Rav Huna holds biblically that you could eat truma. But says the Gemara, but that was his mistake. No, it's only Rabban, it's only rabbinic because of a kras machtabal. The pasuk is only an allusion to this rabbinic halacha, but it's not really a biblical halacha. And therefore, everyone understands correct that it's only rabbinic, but biblically he could go ahead and eat truma. Now, Meisvei, the Steven Gersoyis over here, if this is a question or if this is a rayam, but Meisvei, the Gemara says on Rav Huna of the following brisa. Brisa says, Tumtum, someone who it's not clear the gender because it's covered over with a piece of skin, he cannot eat truma. Why? Because maybe if and when the skin is going to be torn off, you're going to see that really it's a boy, and obviously then he's an oral because you never circumcised him. So a tumtum cannot eat truma. He might be an oral. Now, however, the wives of a tumtum, which later on the Gemara is going to explain, how does a tumtum have wives? He might be a girl, and how could a girl have a girl as a wife? But al kaponim, his wives, va'avadim, and his slaves, they could eat truma because he's a regular kohen. He's just lacking tikkun. He's just not fixed for himself. But just like a tummy person, he can't eat, but his wives and the slaves could eat. So too the tumtum. Now mashach, and this is where the question is coming from. Someone who is meishach or lasai, or v'na'il kishamal, let's say he was born when he was circumcised, they could eat. He was born like he's circumcised, so fine. And mashach, we see also could eat. So that's the question about what the Gemara is going to ask from. But we see a mashach could eat truma. Now androgynous, where if he has two signs of gender, he both has the female and the male genital area, and the male organ that he has was circumcised. So he could eat truma like Rashi says mamanavshach. If he's a man or a woman or his own creature, doesn't make a difference. He's not an oral, and because he did a bris milah, and he's a descendant of a kohen, so he can eat truma. But v'nechel b'kadishim, as Rashi explains, it's too much kadishim, like chatas and ashim and the leftovers of manachas, which are only eaten for the males of the kahanim, and this androgynous, we're not sure, it might be a woman, so he cannot eat kadshim. And the Brisa concludes again, tumtum eina oichel, the tumtum cannot eat, loy b'truma, not with truma. The Gemara is going to explain later on why you're repeating this. You said this previously in the Brisa, in the beginning of the Brisa. But a tumtum cannot eat not truma, but lebekasha, not with kasha. Okay, that's the Brisa. Says the Gemara, Ketani Mias, one thing we learned is that Mashuch v'noili kashumal, those two cases we said, if he was nimshach or lasa, he pulled over the skin to cover over as if he has full foreskin. And if he was born like he was gemalit, they could eat truma. Which again, according to one version at least, that this is a question, obviously that we were not geyser on the, according to Rav Huna, it's yufta to Rav Huna because he said that rabbinically we were geyser and said that he cannot eat. You can't say in the Brisa that they could eat if according to Rav Huna says rabbinically you can't eat. So obviously it's a refutation of Rav Huna who says that they were geyser and they said that he cannot eat, and says it is a refutation of Rav Huna, and we see that Nimshach or Lasai could eat. Again, the Gesayis places brings down both of them if it's an essay supporting, or if it's a refutation. because you could say that it's Mesayela because it's saying that he could be Eichel Minatar, but rabbinically he would not be able to. But that's akapanim. What we see according to our girsa is that you see that a nimshach alasa could eat even rabbinically. Now Amamat, the Gemara goes back to explain what we had said in the Brisa. We said a tumtum ain't eichel b'truma. Someone who is not clear the gender cannot eat truma. Nashav avadav eichel, but his wives and his slaves could eat. Says the Gemara, nashav letumtum manole. Where does the tumtum have wives? As the Gemara explains, ilim the kaddish. If it's talking about where he got engaged to a woman and maybe he's a boy, a man, and therefore his kedushin is a kedushin with a woman, the title in the Brisa is such a concept. Tumtum shekidush. Someone that is not clear the gender of this individual. Kedushin. His kedushin is a kedushin, and therefore, out of doubt, he would need to give her a get if he would want to divorce her. Let's say niskadish. If let's say he becomes engaged to another man, he wrote a kedushin. In other words, if a man gives this tumtum a kedushin, he would, this non-binary individual, we don't know who it actually is, so then it's possibly that he's a woman, and he would have to get, it would also be a kedushin, which, as Rashi explained, what's a nafkamina, because anyways, it would be prohibited to this man, is that the one who got engaged to this tumtum would be forbidden in the sister and the mother of the tumtum, because maybe it's a woman, and maybe he's engaged to her. Obviously, it'd be forbidden because maybe it's a man. It would be a homosexuality. It would be forbidden. He's suffering, but at least it has ramification regarding being forbidden in its relatives, because it might be a woman and it might be a valid kedushin. So that's what we're saying, that it is kedushin if this tumtum gets engaged to a man or to a woman, because it might be either one or the other. But says the Gemara, when did we say it's going to be kedushin? It's l'chumra. There's only a stringency that you would require a get. Did we ever say this halacha, like a leniency, that we should presume that this tumtum is like a man, and then therefore when he's engaged to a bas yisrael she could eat truma? No, safek ishahu. The tumtum is maybe a woman. A woman cannot get engaged to a woman. We don't sanction that as a marriage, and therefore that would not be kinyan kaspai to go ahead and have her eat. So what are you telling me that a tumtum, his wife, could eat truma? What wife? The only time we consider her as a wife is l'chumra, not as a kula that she could eat. So Abaye says it's not a regular tumtum. We're talking about kishabeitz of nikadosh mibachutz. Yes, there's a piece of skin that's covering over the genital area, but you see the testicles sticking out of that membrane. So it's definitively a male.
It's not a tumtum.
What? No, it is a tumtum because cover over. You can't do a bris milah.
Tumtum is a sufik. It's not a sufik. You have a problem of doing a bris milah.
I don't know if the be'etzim tumtum is a suffix. Generally, by tumtum we have a suffix. Here we know that it's a man. It's just a tumtum because it's covered over. Tum means from the word of like susum. It's like closed. Oh, it's closed.
And we don't know.
Yeah, no, not that we don't know. That's what we generally don't know. But here we do know because the testicles are sticking out. So we know that it's a boy. We know that it's a man, and therefore he could be machal as ishta. He's definitely engaged. The only thing is you can't do bris milah because it's covered over with a piece of skin. We're not going to tear it. It might make him into create some type of an injury.
So he can't eat.
So he can't eat, exactly. But his wives, which we know there's a kedusha, even the kula is considered kinyan kas because we know he's qualified as a man. That's one approach. Rav Amma, he says, my nashav, he says, what does it mean, his wives? It means it means ima. It means the women in his life. It doesn't mean his wife, because you're right, it might not be married. It's actually talking about his mother. It says, ima pshita, obviously, it's a child of her husband, who is a kain. Obviously, he'd be able to feed his mother. Says, no, interesting answer. Says, what would you say? Moilid ma'ach. Someone who could have children, he could feed his mother in truma because we're being medayik in the pasuk that says vilid beisai, which we said hein yachilu balachmai, like we learned that the source of a mother eating when she has children is from the pasuk vilid beisai. Although it says hein yochilu balachmai, we said it's like we read him yachilu balachmai. They could feed the mother, but vilid beisai we would read that those who could have children, they could feed the mother. But those who could not have children cannot feed the mother. He cannot have children because he doesn't have medium of reproduction because it's covered over. They're saying that no, that the tumtum could feed nashav is women, which refers to his mother. So that's a machlekes Abaye and Rava. What does this case talk about? So Gemara says Tashma, it's being a raya like Abaye. Well, he said that the case that we're talking about over here is a regular wife, and the way it could be a kedushin is because they have debates of a nekaras mevachutz. Because the Brisa says as follows: Tumtum eino eichel. This Brisa also says that tumtum cannot eat. Lebe truma v'lebe kadsha. Meaning this is the seifa of the Brisa. Meaning, if you recall, we asked this question. We said the Brisa starts off tumtum eino eichel b'truma, but his wives and his slaves could eat, and then it ends again. At the end of the Brisa it says tumtum eino eichel lebe truma v'lebe kadsha. It says the Gemara Bishlam l'Abaye. We understand according to Abaye, the reason why it's repeating it is because there's two different types of halachas that the Brisa is telling us. Tana Reisha. First, the Reisha said he could not eat. A case of oral vada, a definitive oral. What do you mean definitive oral? Because we said we know he's an oral. We know he's a boy. It's just covered with a piece of skin because the beitza are sticking out mibachutz. And that was the chiddush that we said that, however, his wife could eat because he's an oral vada. Because we know he's a boy, that's he can feed his wife. But they was teaching you in the Seifa more, even a Safek oral. Meaning, even if we don't know, because the Beitz of a not b'chutz, we were saying obviously that his wife cannot eat because he can't have a wife, but we're telling you that he cannot eat. And that's why we don't repeat over there by he could feed his wives, because that type of tumtum cannot feed his wives, because he might actually be a girl. But upon him, that's the chiddush that say even in the Safek oral cannot eat. But according to Rabbi Tumtum, the Sefer Lamali, what's Tumtum of the Sefer telling us? They're all the same. He doesn't introduce a new type of Tumtum like Abaye did. Obviously, see, like Abaye says, no, my Tumtum, what does the Brisa mean at the Sefer when it talks about Tumtum, which again, we said the word Tumtum means closed up. It actually means oral. It means a bona fide oral. It means a complete oral, a regular oral, someone who's uncircumcised. He says, what? Hashta, now if you tell me in the Reish, just Safek oral, even like, according to a Rav, it was a regular Safek oral. There was no beats in the Nekaras Mevachutz. We're just saying Nasha meant his mother he could feed, but we don't know his gender. Fa'adi oral achel, you would think a definitive oral could eat. Why do I need to say to tell me tumtum, which really tell me tumtum doesn't mean tumtum, means a regular oral who's stuffed up, which is really what oral means. It means like stuffed up, it's closed up with the foreskin. Why do I need to tell you that oral cannot eat? Says the Gemara, no, ma tam kama. The Bryce is telling me the Sefer is explaining the Reisha and it's saying what's the reason of the Reisha. It's saying ma tam tumtum. What's the reason why a tumtum, who when he's closed up with a piece of skin that he cannot eat truma, memneisha safek oral, who because he might be, we're not sure, it might be a girl, but he might be a oral. And that's what the Sefer is explaining the Reisha. And so what? So he's a safek oral, therefore what? Because oral, which is what we mean with the word tumtum in the Sefer, cannot eat truma and kachim. And this tumtum might be an oral. So it's one halacha, the Sefer should explain the Reisha why he cannot eat truma. Says the Gemara, Lema, let's say that this teaching of Rav Huna, that said, going back to the beginning of the Amid, that he said that from biblical law, Moshe could eat truma, but rabbinically cannot, let's say his teaching is kitanoi. It's like a machlekes tanoim, as Rashi explains, although Rav Huna says mashuch, the person who's Moshe or lasai, it's only rabbinically that he cannot eat. Let's say it's a machlekes tanoim, maybe some hold it's biblical or rabbinic, that they actually disagree in Rav Huna's halacha. As the Brisa says, mashuch, someone drew the skin of his male organ, or maneli kushumal, or if he's born circumcised, which you would have to do the drip of the blood of the covenant, or if a Geshin is ger kushumal, or if a ger converts when he's already circumcised. Why would he be circumcised already? Because the Arabs and the Givainim that convert, they circumcised, and again you would have to draw the blood of the covenant. And the cut Shabbos Maner, or let's say a baby which already was past the 8th day, or Sharkon and or all others who are being circumcised, which the Gemara explains what's that lasui, what's it coming to include? Someone who has two foreskins, meaning he has one skin on top of the other. So regarding all these cases, says the Tanakama, any type of milah has to be during the daytime. But Lazar B'Shimlemi says no. Bismana, when it's in the time of the 8 days, then the bris milah has to be during the daytime. Shaloi bismana, but let's say all these cases which are not a baby on the 8th day, You could do the circumcision by day or by night. That's the machlekes. Says the Gemara. Aren't they disagreeing in Rav Huna's halacha? Where do you see this? Says the Gemara. The Marsaber, the Tanakama held Mashuch. This halacha of Nimshachar Lasa is deraisa. It's a biblical halacha. Oh, biblical. It's like the regular bris milah, which says Bayom. It says Bayom has to be during the daytime. Marsaber, whereas Rabbi Lazar Shimon held that no, he held the Rav Huna that Mashuch is Rabbanan. It's rabbinic, so okay. Rabbinic doesn't say that it has to be by the day. It could even be at nighttime. Says about Tizber, that's logical to say that they're disagreeing in Rav Huna's halacha if Moshe is the Rabban deraisa. That's only one of the cases. What's one of the other cases? Cut and Shabbos Manai. A baby who is past the 8th day, let's say he's on the 14th day, he wasn't able to do the bris bismanai. Nikol manam the Rabban. Is there anyone that holds rabbinic? Everyone holds deraisa. A baby has to. Any male has to do bris milah is biblical halacha. Just the earliest you can do is the 8th time. Which actually interesting. This Taisus here on the top. Is one of these Taisus over here. Oh yeah, this top one, which this halacha is just it's one of these soides on the mitzvah stages one garama. It says Rav Ephraim asks, why does the Gemara in the first paragraph in Kedushin need to tell me that oisoi v'lo oisa, that a woman is not obligated to circumcise her son? What do you mean? It's enough because it's a mitzvah seishes man garama, because it's a day and not a nighttime. And for that reason, we exempt a woman from tzitzis. So why do you need to say a special drasha of oisa v'lo oisa? As we see in our Gemara, bris milah is only at the daytime. So either Tesa says, you're right, it's Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Shimon, that who holds that actually the bris milah could be when the shalei bezmanoi could be that by yom and balayla, so it wouldn't be a mitzvah zman gerama. And but then Taisa says I v'had nima l'shmayna, but I bris milah only starts in day 8, so it is man gerama. So Taisa is a very big yesod that comes out in a lot of lumdus in the mitzvah zman gerama. L'chashav man gerama, keep that. The mishmayne ve'elach koshai dizmanu. From when the chiyuv starts, it never time bound. The fact that it starts at a certain point doesn't make it as man garama. Man garama is only if it would be dependent on certain times. But once the chiyuv starts, in this case, it's going to be la'olam, so that wouldn't make it as man garama. That's why you need a special niyud for that of women. That was a very important insight. The Gemara is not necessarily negated for our circuit per se. But the Gemara says you can't say that the machlik is in Rav Huna's halacha, because if that would be the case, then what would you do with Katan Shabbos Manoi? Why would anyone hold that it would be Balayla der Osa? Sailor rather says the Gemara a different interpretation. The Kuli Amad know that everyone holds Mashach, you could say everyone holds like Rav Huna, that is Rabbanan. That's only rabbinic. And Katan Shabbos Manoi, of course, is deraisa. So then, so what are they disagreeing about? So why would one hold that it could be at nighttime and one hold only be during the daytime? Obviously not because of it's Rabban deraisa, because everyone agrees one case is Rabban, one case is deraisa. So rather, Marsa the Tanakama held darshin ubayom. We expound the extra vav. You could have said bayom hashmini yimol, and it says ubayom hashmini yimol. The extra vav is coming to include mila shaloi bezmanoi to tell you that it has to be also during the daytime. Now, although as Rashi points out, Mashach obviously is not being included from here because Mashach itself is rabbinic halacha, and it was only instituted at a later point in time. But since a child who is Abr's Manai is being included from the extra vav, even though it's Shalei Bezmanai, so too the rabbinic institution is always Ke'ed Daraisa, and just like we see that even when it's not a Bay Bayayim, the halacha of Uvayim is telling you it has to be even by daytime, so too the Rabban and halacha Mashach held the Tanakama, it also has to be during the daytime because Rabbi called the Takan Rabbanan, whatever the Rabbanan instituted was came the Reisa Takan, was like the biblical halacha. That's the Tanakama. No, we don't expound Uvayoim. And therefore we don't learn out from it regarding a child that's past the 8th day, and therefore you could have the circumcision even at nighttime. And for sure Mashach, which only rabbinic, for sure could also be during the nighttime. Which as the Gemara says, Kiha, like we find in the Brisa we're going to quote right now, the question that Rabbi Lazar asked on Rabbi Yechanan from a Brisa, that we find that a child that's past the 8th day, from the word Uva Yom Hashmini is included, that he could only have the circumcision during the daytime. That's where the Tanakama is coming from, but Rabbi Lazar Shimon did not hold with it, which is the Yasser Rabbi Yechanan Kadosh. Rabbi Yechanan was sitting and he was expounding the following halacha. He said, Noiser is halacha, when a carbon is left over, it's time that it could be eaten. And so when it's bismanoi, which means to say the day that it became nicer, meaning it's already just came over the next day, in an Isra of Ela Bayim. Then it could only be burned during the daytime, like the Pasuk of Zayin says, Bayom HaShlishi. Karmi could only be eaten for 2 days and 1 night. When it comes to the third day, it says, Bayom HaShlishi, you have to burn it. So it's during the daytime. But Shaloi Bizmaner, let's say it's not its time anymore, you delayed burning it the day that it became nicer, then this Isra Bayim Bayim Alayla says Rabbi Yechanan, it can be burned both by day and by nighttime. Now on that, the Blaza asked on Rabbi Yechanan, it's from this brisa that we want to show this halacha of uvayon. He asked from the following brisa, says, I would only know that if the baby's getting the bris milah on the 8th day, that the bris milah can only be during the daytime. How do I know to include if it's the 9th day, last star the 10th day, last the 11th day, last the 12th day, meaning what's these numbers of 9, 10, 11, 12? The Gemara in Shabbos Daf Kavod Zayin tells us that yes, even if it's a healthy baby, but let's say the baby's born by Bein Hashmashas, by twilight, so you don't know which day it's from, you can't do it early, because early you're not doing anything. Later, although it may be delaying, but you're still fulfilling the mitzvah, then you do it to the 9th day, so to speak, meaning you do it to the next day afterwards. Let's say Bein Hashmashas of Erev Shabbos, then you can't even do it the next day, because that's Shabbos, and it might be B'Shlei Bezmani, because it might really be Friday, but you can't do Friday either, because it might not be yet the 8th day, so then you do it 10 days later, on Sunday. Let's say the Yom Tov falls out, it's a 2-day Yom Tov, it's Shabbos, then Yom Tov. Then you're going to do it on the 11th day. Now let's say there's also 2 days of Rosh Hashanah after Shabbos, so then there's 3 days you can't do it, then you can do the Bris Milah on the 12th day. But if it has an A, all these cases of 9, 10, 11, 12, how do I know those also have to be during the daytime? Tamalema says, the Brisa, and this is what we're bringing in for, Uvayoim. You see, Uvayoim, the extra vav is telling you, says Rabbi Lazar, asking Rabbi Yechanan, that even l'achar zmanoi has to be during the daytime. And he actually, Rabbi Lazar points out one step more. He says, even according to Rabbi Lazar B'Shimon, that we just quoted before, that he says, bris milah shaloi bezmanoi, you can do the bris milah even at nighttime. So you see, he doesn't dash from vav. So you see that shaloi bezmanoi might not have to be during the daytime, but vav hey, in other words, like v'hanoiser, which not only has an extra vav, has extra hey also, he's darish, everyone would agree that then it would be a drasha, and therefore nicer only has to be during the daytime. This is not only bizmanai, but it's even shaloi bizmanai. That's what Rabbi Lazar was asking Rabbi Yechanan, why you're saying that nicer only has to be burned during the day by bizmanai, but shaloi bizmanai not. What do you mean? You see from the halacha of bris milah uvayaim that the extra vav tells me, and for sure when you have a vav hey va nicer, that's coming to include even shaloi bizmanai. Now ishtik. First, the Gemara finishes this narrative. Rabbi Yechanan was silent after Rabbi Lazar pointed out. Again, this points out our halacha that the drasha of the vav is what teaches us the halacha of adding on shalei bizmanai also of bris milah. There's 2 halachas, bris milah and noiser. Rabbi Lazar was telling to Rabbi Yechanan from the halacha of bris milah. But again, it shows us support for our sugi that we were interpreting, showing that the extra vav is what tells you shalei bizmanai also has to be during the daytime. But he was showing it to the halacha of noiser. So Rabbi Yechanan was silent. Abasa the Nafik, after Rabbi Lazar, his Talmud left, Rabbi Yechanan said to Rish Lakish, Isla ben Pedas. This is Rabbi Lazar ben Pedas. He says, I saw by ben Pedas, that he was sitting and expounding these psukim, like Moshe from the mouth of Hashem. Meaning like in the wording of how Tanoim would do it. Because Rashi explains Rabbi Lazar ben Pedas was not a Tana, he was not Meir. He was the student of Rabbi Yechanan. And whenever it's mentioned throughout Shas and the Gemara, Rabbi Lazar means this Rabbi Lazar ben Pedas. Because Rabbi Lazar, that's mentioned anonymously in Mishnais and Braises, that's Rabbi Lazar ben Shemua. It's not the same Rabbi Lazar. Rabbi Lazar Tana, Rabbi Lazar Namoy. So you're saying, wow, he mamish dashed looking like a Tana. Right? To which only Shloker said to Rabbi Yechanan, Didehi? You think this drasha he was saying, Uvayoim and Vahanoiser, you think this was his own? Masneitahi. It's a Braisa. So I said to Rabbi Yechanan, where's this Braisa? So the B'teres Kainim, which are the psukim, the Braisas that expound the drashos and Sefer Yikra. So Nafik Tanya, Rabbi Yechanan went out and he learned Teres Kainim, Betlas Yom in 3 days. It was Savara Betlas Yachi, and then he went through the logic in 3 months. So you could learn something in 3 days, but then it takes 10 times the amount of time to go ahead, and then he does it in 3 months. That's when he went through and learned it. But upon them again, it showed us this idea of the drasha, which is really coming from the vav. Like we see, Rabbi Lazar was telling Rabbi Yechanan from the halacha of the sugi of Now, continuing on this theme about an oral, which we were talking about his status for Truma, now we talk about his status we had spoken about once before actually of spraying. Now we're going to talk about his being Mekabel Hazah. Amr Balasa. Oral Shahiza. If someone who's uncircumcised sprays the paraduma waters on someone else, Hazasik Sher. So the spraying is valid. Just like we find by someone who had immersed himself that day from his tumah, which is Sha'af al-Pi. Even though Sha'asa b'Truma, that he is forbidden in Truma. Later on Daf Ayin Dal Mabez, the Gemara is going to expound it from Sukkim. How do we know this halacha? That it's full yom, it's forbidden in Truma. But even though he's forbidden in Truma, Kasher b'Para, he's valid by the paraduma, meaning he's allowed to spray on someone who's tummy from a mess, as the Gemara later on the Sugi is going to teach us regarding its full yom that is kasher by paraduma. So, if that's the case, so we're going to say that the same thing would apply by an oral. That an oral will also have the same halacha, that he's going to be able to spray by the paraduma waters. Says the Gemara, well, Mala Tful Yoim, what are you comparing from a Tful Yoim? Shekimut b'Maiser. A Tful Yoim, he's permitted in Maiser. In contrast, an oral is forbidden. So what are you saying that because a Tful Yoim is permitted, so too you're going to say by an oral? Says the Gemara, what do you mean? Atu anan lachil kamrin? You think we're talking about eating? You think we're eating the paraduma? That you're going to ask, oh, wait a second. An oral is forbidden to eat Maiser, so therefore it's going to be forbidden by para? No, anan l'negia kamina. We're talking about touching. And regarding touching, there's no question to say, oh, an oral is forbidden to touch Maiser. It's not true. Because even touching kachim is permitted for him. And therefore this is how we're darshing. Matzvul yom, if we find by someone who immersed himself that day, sha'asa b'negia the truma, that it's forbidden to touch truma, as the Gemara teaches later on the Fain Haim and Aleph, where it says in the pasuk, "B'mayim yuva," he's going to come into water, but tummy the is going to be tummy up until the evening. Now, in that pasuk, it's talking about touching, because in that pasuk is talking about a vessel, and it's saying that your tummy until the evening means you need to have Harav Shemesh, you need to have sundown. So you see that when he's in full yom, which he only told but he didn't have sundown yet, he's forbidden to touch that vessel of truma that has the status of truma. And still mutter b'para, he's permitted to spray the ash waters of the paraduma. Oh, so oral shemot bin negia. So oral, some of those uncircumcised, there's a lot of touch truma. He's not only eat truma, but he's allowed to touch it. In addition, mutter b'para, isn't it a kabel chaimer that he's going to be mutter to spray the paraduma ashes? That's the halacha that we said that an oral is permitted to go ahead and spray ish. Oral shahiza has also share as a kabel chaimer from Tful Yom. And Tanabach certainly in the Brisa. Oral shahiza, someone who's uncircumcised that sprayed the paraduma ash water. Azasik share, his spray is valid. On my side, there was such a story, and the Chacham validated his spraying. However, Meisve, the Gemara asks from the following Brisa. The Brisa says, Tumtum shekidish. But Tumtum, again, we don't know his gender. If he did the kiddush, like we explained in the introduction, by the paraduma, what happens is that you bring it as a carbon, then you burn the animal, then you gather the ashes, and then you mix the ashes with water. That's called kiddush. The kiddush is the mixing the ashes with the water. So if a tumtum does this, kiddushay pasul. His making the ash water is going to be invalid. Why? When they should suffix aral. A tumtum is maybe an aral. The aral pasul kaddish, and an aral is invalid to do the kiddush. Whereas vandreginus, someone who has both signs of gender and he's circumcised, Shekiddush, if he does the mixing of the ashes with the water, Kedusha Kasha. It is valid because, as Rashi explains, even if he's a woman is kosher to do the Kiddush according to Rabbanan, as the Gemara is going to learn later on their reasoning. Yudam, he says, no, Av Androginus Shekiddush, also Androginus does Kiddush, Kedusha B'sulam. Shesavakisha, Androginus might be considered an halacha like a female. V'isha B'sulam Kaddish, and the woman's forbidden to do the Kiddush. But one thing, says the Gemara concluding the question, Ketani Miyah, we learned in this Brisa, that oral v'safikara, not only oral, but also even the tumtum was maybe an oral. We said, pasul milakadish is invalid from doing kiddush. Wait, didn't you tell me an oral is valid to do the avodah of the spraying of the avodah by the paraduma? You said a kabachema from Tful Yom. So how can you say that an oral is possible from doing the kiddush. Obviously, it's a refutation of this halacha of Rabbi Lazar who says oral shehi says osik shiur. So Rabbi Yisrael says not difficult. You know why? Because Hai Tana, you know who the Tana of this brisa is? It's Tana debei Rebbe Kiva. It's a Tana of the yeshiva Rebbe Kiva. The Marbile that he included, as we wrote this already in the beginning of the paragraph of Ayin and Aleph, he holds the oral katame. He holds that an oral halachically is qualified like a tummy person. The time we learn the brisa. So Rebbe Kiva, he says in the pasuk in the Yikr. So essentially, what the Gemara is answering is saying that this is a tali na machlekes tanoim hayidarshan the psukim. Pasuk said in the Yikr, ish. Any man from the zera of Aaron, from the children of Aaron, like Kohen, and he has tzaras or zav, some type of tumah. So bakadishim, which refers to truma lo yechel, he shouldn't eat until he becomes purified. Now, what does ish come to include? L'rabbi oral comes to include an oral. Now, from the fact that we're including an oral like those of tumah, obviously that an oral has an equivalent halacha like a tummy person, and therefore just like a tummy person cannot touch truma, so to an oral cannot touch truma like a tummy person. And that's why this brisa holds an oral is going to be possible from doing the avodah of kiddush. Why? Because you don't have a kal v'chomer from a tful yom. Because an oral actually cannot touch truma. Because it's like Rabbi Kiva, who holds an oral like a tummy person. Oh, Rabbi Lazar said, my halacha is not going like Rabbi Kiva. That's going like Rabbi Eliezer, if you recall from a previous daf, when we learned out that the halacha of Tosher Kain Masach Aleich and Kodesh teaches the oral cannot eat truma, but he's permitted to touch. Only Rabbi Kiva holds the Isra B'chila is from Ish, which is comparing to Tzeru and Zav. He would hold the Asa B'Negi. It's a little of a complex point over here. But that's what the Gemara is explaining. Rabbi Yisrael wants to say that this machlekes, it's not typical on Rabbi Lazar, because Rabbi Lazar is going like Rabbi Eliezer, who had darshan the way an oral cannot eat truma from Gezer Shava from Karban Pesach, from Teshuv and Sachar. But that wouldn't tell us anything about not touching it, not tummy. So you could touch it. So then you can make the kal v'chomer. If tful yom, which is forbidden to touch truma, is permitted to do the avodah b'paraduma. So the oral is even permitted to touch truma. For sure, he should be permitted to do the avodah b'paraduma. In contrast, this brisa that says the oral cannot do the kiddush is going like Rabbi Kiva, who learns out that Ish teaches you this halacha of being forbidden to eat, which that would also tell us you're not allowed to touch, because your mom is like a tummy, and the oral is like a tummy. Oh, so you can't make a kal v'chomer, because you're worse than a tful yom. You can't prove to me that if a tful yom could do the paraduma, then for sure an oral could. No, because actually he's like not even tful yom. He's a tummy person, like a tzeru and a zav. So that's what Rabbi Yisrael wants to say. Well, it's not difficult on Rabbi Eliezer, but Amar Rabbi says you can't say this. He says, "Have you sitting in Rabbi Yisrael?" He says, "I was sitting in Rabbi Yisrael who said this pshat, and Mikashli, and it bothered me that if there is such an opinion of Rabbi Kiva, that you want to say a chiddush. Meaning, when we said on the previous stuff from Rabbi Kiva that the source that oral is forbidden to eat truma is because we compare him to tzurua and zav to tummy, we thought that means, okay, you're not allowed to eat like a tummy person. But you want to tell me that his mamash like a tummy for all halachas, that even for touching, mamash oral's like a tummy person, can't touch truma. So it says, loy l'shtam tana. We're not going to find a tana anywhere that should ever teach regarding the halachas of touching from tuma, v'lisni oral v'hatame, to say someone who's uncircumcised and tummy together. I have a lame Rabbi Kiva, and that we should say that it's Rabbi Kiva, and to find such a thing, meaning it's a big chiddush. We never find anywhere. We never talk about, oh, these tummy people cannot touch truma. We never said. No one ever mentioned that there was a case of oral and tummy to say, aha, and you know who that is? That's Rabbi Kiva. We never find such a thing. So obviously that you cannot say that there's such opinion of Rabbi Kiva, because we would have found this somewhere in Shas. Obviously, this second brisa that's saying the oral is possible of doing kiddush is a special stringency of the paraduma. But regarding touching truma, you could say the oral would be permitted. And essentially, what the Gemara is saying is that you could say the kal v'chomer from tful yom, that an oral would be permitted to touch truma, and the machlekes was specifically regarding a stringency of paraduma. So according to Rabbi, the machlekes regarding par is independent machlekes. Do we say that an oral is kasher l'par? Because why not? The kal v'chomer from tful yom, like Rabbi Lazar said. Or no, you can even say oral is possible with truma. That's done because of chumer de para, but not like the way Rabbi Yisrael said that oh, it's machlekes tanoim, how you learn up if you would have a kavachayim, because according to Rabbi Kiva, yes, you're forbidden to do the kiddush by paraduma because you're more severe than Tvil Yom, because you actually cannot even touch truma. I never found such a thing. No one ever said such a thing that we're going to say oral and Tameh cannot touch truma, and therefore he disagrees with Rabbi Yosef's premise. He does say that it's not going to be difficult on Rabbi Lazar, because ultimately everyone would agree that an oral would be able to touch truma, would be a kabachem. The whole machlekes he has with Rabbi Yosef is regarding how do you understand this brisa of why the oral cannot do that by the paraduma. Rabbi Yosef wants to say because it's mamish aser, because you don't have a kabbalah, and the Rebbe says no, it is a kabbalah, but there's a stringency we have by paraduma because of chomer depar. But the Gemara says v'loi, is that really so that Rabbi Kiva does not hold like this? But for Tani, we learned in the brayso that says oral v'hatame petur min ha're'iyah. They're exempt from coming and doing the pilgrimages by the Beis Hamikdash. So obviously you see that an oral is like a tamei. Says the Gemara, no, hasim mishum demois. There it's because the oral is repulsive to be seen in the azar. That's why we say that he's part of a re'iyah. But it's not because of that he's mamish like a tummy person, just like a tummy person cannot come into the azar, so to an oral is considered tummy. No, I think it's a tummy for all halachas, the way Rabbi Yosef wanted to say. It just means he also doesn't have, but for a different reason, because he's lies. And says the Gemara of Azdu. We're going back now to the previous discussion. This brayso that we quoted of the machlekes Yehuda and Rabbanan, who had a machlekes regarding androgynous. If the androgynous could go ahead and spray the mechatas, the paraduma ash waters, or not, they go l'tamahu. They go according to the reasoning mentioned elsewhere. The time they go in the brayso. So again, this is parenthetical. It's only because we brought this in because we wanted to ask from the halacha of oral regarding kiddush. But once we brought in this brayso which has a machlekes Yehuda and Rabbanan regarding some of the cases, one of them being androgynous. So the Gemara just explains that they go l'shitasa. The time they learn the brayso. Hakoil, everyone, meaning everyone that's tahar, everyone's kashem lekadish. Everyone is valid to go ahead and make the mechatas, which is the mixing of the ashes with the spring water. And that's even a woman. But an oral and a tummy, that's not included. But everyone who's kosher is kashem lekadish, chutz mecher shed bekat, except for someone who's mentally deranged, deaf, mute, and a minor. That's a tanakam. If you do machshav bekat, he validates by a minor. And upaisel be'isha, that he invalidates by a woman, and by androgynous, because androgynous is maybe a woman. So you see the Tanakhama doesn't mention androgynous being possible. Yehuda mentions it is. That's the machlekes that we said in our previous brayso. So it says the Gemara, my time Rabbanan, what's the reason of the Rabbanan that they hold that androgynous is valid? Says the Gemara, because the pasuk says in Bamidbar, after it talks about the gathering of the ashes, meaning after you burnt the paro, and after you gathered the ashes, so it talks about this avodah of kiddush, and it doesn't have any other avodah between the gathering of the ashes and the mixing it with the water. So what does the pasuk say over there? The pasuk says, "V'lo k'chula tamei," that they should take for the tamei person, and it says in the plural "v'lo k'chu," they should take for the tamei person ma'afar shevas achatas, from the ashes that was burnt of the chatas, of the paradum. So the Gemara explains, Hanach the pasibasi, for those who are invalid of gathering, because remember there's a few steps to this avodah. There's the shchita, then there's the burning, then there's the gathering of the ashes, then there's the mixing of the ashes, and then there's the spray. So if you're saying v'lakhu, you're telling me that those who are puzzled by the asifa, psul b'kiddush, are invalid to go ahead and do the kiddush. Hanach the kshem basi, for those who are valid to do the gathering, are valid to do the kiddush. As Rashi explains that the Gemara elsewhere, either be in Yoma or the Sifri in Parshas Chukas, the Gemara expounds according to the Rabbanan. It says va'asaf ish. When it talks about the gathering of the ashes, which is the avodah right before kiddush, it says an ish will gather, which tells us and not a minor. When it says va'asaf ish tahar, tahar is coming to validate anyone who's tahar, even a woman. And so whoever is valid by the asifa, it's saying, they, who's they going on? They, whoever did the asifa, is going to do this next avodah of the kiddush of the mixing. Because as Rashi explains, you can't expound to the opposite and say, maybe ish is not including a minor, maybe it's including a woman, and maybe tar is including even a minor, because that's what the Gemara says over there in Yomei Daf Beis, that whole parasha is what's called mashma moitzi b'yad mashma, which is that everything says one thing and then something comes to exclude from that, and you go through the whole order, you'll see that it has to be the way the Rabbana is saying it over here, that the woman is valid and the child is not valid. Now, so akaponim, the androgynous that's valid by the asifa is going to be valid by the kiddush too. But Yehuda Malach, he would tell you no. If that would be the case, that who is valid by the gathering of the ashes is what you're saying regarding the kiddush of the mixing with the water. So name it kro v'lokach. The pasuk should have said v'lokach latame. Just like you read by the gathering of the ashes v'asa v'loshen yachid. My v'lokhu. What's the plural? To tell you that the pesul nas. Even those that are invalid by the asifa of the gathering of the ashes, like for example a child, are going to be valid over here. And that's why he disagrees and he holds that kiddush is valid even by all those that are puzzled by the asifa. Says the Gemara, if that's the case of Isha Nami. So he should validate also a woman. How come he agrees that a woman is not going to be valid? Oh, says the Gemara, because it says v'nasan. It says in the masculine, v'nasan he will put, v'loy v'nasan not she will put. Which Tyson points out that's only from the extra word. Not because v'nasan in the male and not v'nasan in the female. Because the whole Torah is written in Lashon Zachar. And I wouldn't prove every mitzvah that's written in Lashon Zachar and excluding him, a female, but it's because of the extra word. But with Rabbanan, they would tell you no. The fact that it changes from the singular to the plural is not to tell you whoever was puzzled by the asif is going to be kosher by the kiddush, and that's like we said that they're going l'shitasam. Because if we would say, like you want to say, we should have kept the same the same format of that it was by the asifa. By the kiddush to say in the singular that he will take and he will put. I mean, I would have thought this to say that shakal chad, that one person will take the ashes, v'yav chad, and then one person will have to go ahead and put in the water. Because Rachmana, v'lakhu, therefore the Torah writes, v'lakhu, that it doesn't have to be the same person. Because Rachmana v'lakhu b'nasna, how we said all in the plural, v'lakhu and they will take, b'nasna and they will give. I mean, I would have thought to say the shakli trade b'yav trade, that two have to take and two have to give. Because Rachmana v'lakhu b'nasna, therefore the Torah writes, v'lakhu they will take, b'nasna they will put. The Torah for the shakli trade b'yav chad doesn't make a difference. Even let's say two take and one puts, it's all going to be good, but don't be medayik from the changing of the wording, like you want to say, oh, whoever's possible with this kasher, but no, it's coming to teach me something else. Now the Gemara concludes in the top of Ayin Gilum and Aleph, one more related halacha that it says over there by Paraduma, it says, Vehiza atar ala tameh. The tar person will spray the ash water on the tummy person. Now, by saying the tar person, the word tar tells you that what I'm telling you is tar over here is machlal, the inference is shehu tameh, that he must be tameh for something else. Which limit comes to teach you al tful yoim, someone who immersed himself that day, who is tamei for truma, that should kasher b'para. And that's what we said before, that although someone who is a tful yoim is obviously is possible for truma, but he's going to be kasher for the paraduma, as Rashi explains. If you would think to say v'hiza tar latami means a bona fide tar person who already had a herb shemesh at sundown, then the pasuk shouldn't have said anything. I would know that a tummy person is forbidden to do the avodah by the paraduma, because the Torah calls it a chatas. And chatas has to be with a tar person like all other things. So why are you calling it tahar? To tell you that no matter how minute the tar of the person is. We find that Tvul Yom is called tar, like the pasuk of Yirgir Dal, B'rachas B'mayim B'tar. So therefore, if you're saying V'hiza tar latami, you come to include even the Tvul Yom, and that's what we said, when we said before, when we wanted to say the Kabbalah Chomer for the oral, Shehiza Azasik Sher, which we said a Kabbalah Chomer from Tvul Yom. Ma Tvul Yom, that is possible by Truma, which we said he's not allowed to touch Truma, yet he's permitted to do that by the Paraduma. Where do we know that? That's from this halacha V'hiza tar latami, which of course has to be tar. No, any type of tar, even that at Tvul Yom, he's allowed to do that by the paraduma. That's the halacha that Rabbi Lazar was saying. So oral is in the kol shekain, that for sure where he's permitted to go ahead and he's allowed to touch truma. Again, not like Rabbi Kiva, like those wanted to say. And therefore, for sure, he's allowed to go ahead and do the avodah on the paraduma. I think it's any time.